It was a Tuesday that felt much hotter than usual. The sun was blazing down on the movie set, turning the air into something thick and hard to breathe. Cameras were rolling, cables snaked across the ground like black vines, and people in uniforms were rushing back and forth. It was a noisy place, full of shouting and the sounds of heavy machinery. In the center of all this chaos was Keanu. He wasn't sitting in a fancy chair waiting for someone to call his name. He was right in the middle of the action, ready to work. He had been at it for hours. Since early that morning, he had been running, jumping, and hitting his marks with a precision that amazed everyone watching. He was doing his own stunts again, just like he always did. He didn't like using a double if he could do it himself, but if you looked really closely, you could see the wear and tear on him. His shoulders were slumped just a little bit more than usual. When the cameras weren't rolling, he would rub his lower back or wince slightly when he thought no one was watching. But the moment the director yelled, "Action!" his eyes would snap open and he was full of energy again. He never complained, he never asked for a break. He just wanted to get the shot right for the team. During a break in the filming, while the crew was moving big lights around for the next scene, Keanu walked over to the edge of the set. He spotted a young technician who was struggling with a heavy piece of equipment. It wasn't Keanu's job to help, and he was the biggest star on the lot, but that didn't matter to him. He walked right over and grabbed the other end of the equipment. "Let me give you a hand with that," he said. His voice was kind and quiet, cut through by the noise of a generator nearby. The young technician looked surprised, then smiled. "Thanks, Mr. Reeves. This thing is heavier than it looks." They carried the gear together and set it down gently. Keanu wiped a bit of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He didn't walk away to go to his air-conditioned trailer. Instead, he stood there and started talking to the young man. They talked about simple things, the heat, the long hours, and how good the coffee was on this particular set compared to others. Keanu laughed at a joke the technician made. It was a real laugh, the kind that crinkles the corners of his eyes and makes you feel like you've known him for years. "You're doing great work," Keanu told him, patting him gently on the shoulder. "I really appreciate it. We couldn't do this without you." It meant the world to the technician. Here was this famous actor treating him like a friend. But as they stood there chatting in the bright sunlight, something changed. Keanu stopped talking mid-sentence. He put a hand out to steady himself against a large metal storage crate. "Whoa," Keanu whispered. He blinked a few times, trying to clear his vision. The world seemed to tilt sideways. The bright sun suddenly looked too bright, flashing in his eyes like a camera strobe. The technician noticed immediately. "Sir, are you okay?" Keanu took a deep breath, trying to shake off the dizziness. "Yeah, I think I just stood up too fast. Just a little head rush." He tried to smile to reassure the young man, but the smile didn't quite reach his lips this time. His face had gone very pale, almost gray. He reached for a bottle of water sitting on the crate, but his hand didn't close around it properly. His fingers missed the cap, and the bottle tipped over, spilling water onto the dry dust. That was the moment everyone knew something was wrong. Keanu's knees buckled. It wasn't a dramatic fall like in the movies. He didn't cry out or grab his chest in pain. He simply lost the strength to hold himself up. It was like a puppet whose strings had been cut. His eyes rolled back and he slid down the side of the metal crate, collapsing onto the ground in a heap. The technician didn't scream. He just reacted. He dropped to his knees beside Keanu. "Help. I need help over here," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. The busy set went dead silent in a heartbeat. People stopped moving. Cables were dropped. The director looked over from his monitor, his face falling. Within seconds, the on-set medic was sprinting across the lot, pushing through the stunned crowd that had gathered. "Back up. Give him some air," the medic yelled as he slid to a stop next to the unconscious actor. Keanu was lying still on the dirt. His chest was rising and falling, but it was shallow and way too fast. The medic checked his pulse, his face tight with concentration. He grabbed his radio. "We have a male, late 50s, unresponsive. Pulse is rapid and weak. We need a bus immediately. Possible cardiac event. We are loading and rolling." The fear on the set was tangible. You could feel it in the air. This wasn't a scene they could reshoot if they messed it up. This was real life, and it was terrifying. Crew members stood in tight circles, whispering to each other, their hands over their mouths. Everyone liked Keanu. He was one of the good ones. Seeing him like this, so broken and still, was heartbreaking. The medic and two assistants carefully lifted Keanu onto a stretcher. His arm hung limp off the side, swinging lifelessly as they moved him toward the waiting ambulance that had just pulled up to the gate. The sirens were off, but the red and blue lights were flashing, painting the surrounding buildings in streaks of color. As they wheeled him past the crew, no one cheered or clapped. It was too serious for that. There was only a heavy, suffocating silence. The young technician Keanu had been helping stood frozen, his hands covered in dust, watching his friend being taken away. He couldn't believe it. Just moments ago, they were laughing about coffee. Now Keanu was fighting for his life. They reached the ambulance. The back doors were swung open wide. They slid the stretcher inside and locked it into place. The medic jumped in after him, continuing to monitor the machines that were now beeping softly, creating an eerie rhythm in the small space. One of the production assistants ran up to the back of the ambulance. "I'm coming with him," she said, her voice trembling. She had been with him for years, organizing his schedule and protecting his time. The medic nodded shortly. "Get in." Quickly, she climbed up into the dimly lit vehicle and sat on the small bench seat opposite the stretcher. She looked down at Keanu. He looked so small, so fragile without his usual energy. She reached out and gently held his hand, which felt cool and clammy. It felt wrong to see him this way. He was always the one taking care of everyone else, making sure people were fed and happy. Seeing him helpless was a shock she wasn't prepared for. The driver closed the double doors at the back of the van with a solid metal click. The sound echoed through the lot, signaling the end of the workday. No one was going back to filming now. The mood was destroyed, replaced by worry. Inside the ambulance, the engine roared to life. The vehicle lurched forward, picking up speed as it raced toward the hospital. The city streets flashed by through the small windows, but inside, time seemed to move very slowly. The medic adjusted an IV drip, checking the clear fluids flowing into Keanu's vein. "He's stable for now," the medic said softly to the assistant, glancing at the monitor. "But we need to get him to the ER fast. His body is under a massive amount of stress. It's like he's running on empty." The assistant nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She squeezed Keanu's hand tighter. "Come on, Keanu, stay with us," she whispered. "Don't leave us yet." The sirens started up, a loud wail that cut through the afternoon traffic. Cars pulled over to the side of the road, their drivers unaware that the man inside the ambulance was a Hollywood hero. To them, it was just another patient in trouble. But to the people back on the set, and to the woman holding his hand, it felt like the world was holding its breath. The bumping of the road made the stretcher shake slightly. Keanu remained unconscious, lost in a deep, dark place. The exhaustion that had been building up for months, maybe even years, had finally caught up with him, dragging him down into the darkness. The doctors at the hospital had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that when they looked at his tests, they would find a secret history of pain that would shock them all. But for now, there was only the sound of the siren and the hum of the engine, carrying him toward whatever came next. The ride through the city felt like it took forever, even though the driver was going as fast as he could. Inside the back of the ambulance, it was cramped and noisy. The siren was screaming right outside the thin metal walls, mixing with the sound of the tires hitting the pavement. Every bump in the road made the stretcher squeak. The young assistant sat on the small bench, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the seat. She couldn't take her eyes off Keanu. He looked so different from the man she saw every day. Usually he was full of life, cracking jokes or asking about someone's day. Now he was pale and still, his chest rising and falling in a way that didn't look natural. The medic was busy. He moved with quick, sharp movements, checking the monitors and adjusting the flow of the clear liquid dripping into the tube in Keanu's arm. He looked calm, but his eyes were serious. "He's holding steady," the medic said, glancing over at the assistant. He could see how scared she was. "Talk to him." Sometimes hearing a familiar voice helps. She leaned in closer, bringing her face near his. She didn't know what to say. She didn't want to sound panicked. "Keanu," she whispered softly. "It's me. We're almost there. You're going to be okay. Just hang on." She squeezed his hand, but there was no response. His fingers were limp and cold. It felt like holding on to ice. She thought about all the times he had been there for her. When her mother was sick, He had sent flowers and called every day to check in. When she was stressed about work, he would bring her a coffee and tell her to breathe. He was the person who fixed things, the person who carried everyone else. Seeing him like this broke her heart. It felt like the strongest pillar of their world had suddenly crumbled. The ambulance slowed down and made a sharp turn. The siren changed pitch, lowering in volume as they pulled up to the entrance of the emergency room. The vehicle stopped with a jerk. Before the engine was even off, the back doors were flung open. Bright sunlight flooded the small space, making the assistant blink. A team of people in blue scrubs were waiting. They didn't ask questions. They didn't ask for an autograph. They just moved. Hands reached in to grab the rails of the stretcher. 1, 2, 3, lift, a tall doctor ordered. They pulled the stretcher out of the ambulance and wheeled it toward the automatic glass doors that slid open to welcome them. The assistant jumped out and ran to keep up. She felt useless, like she was in the way, but she couldn't leave him. Inside, the hospital was a different world. It was cool and smelled strongly of cleaning supplies and medicine. The air conditioning hit them like a wall, a sharp contrast to the heat outside. The wheels of the stretcher squeaked loudly on the polished linoleum floors as they rushed down a long hallway. Nurses were running alongside, hooking up new machines and shouting out numbers that didn't make sense to her. "Blood pressure is dropping," a nurse said, her voice tight. "We need to get him into Trauma 1. They burst through a set of double swinging doors and into a large, bright room. The lights were blindingly white. There were monitors everywhere, blinking and beeping. The energy in the room was frantic but controlled. Everyone had a job to do. "Okay, let's get him transferred," the lead doctor said. He was an older man with gray hair and glasses, looking intense but focused. "On my count, 3, 2, 1. They lifted Keanu from the ambulance stretcher onto the narrow hospital bed. As soon as he was settled, they began to cut away his clothes. The assistant took a step back toward the corner of the room. She felt like she was intruding on something very private. She watched as the doctor began to examine him, pressing his fingers against Keanu's neck and listening to his heart with a stethoscope. "History of exhaustion?" the doctor asked, looking up briefly. "He's been working nonstop," the assistant spoke up, her voice trembling. "He hasn't been sleeping much. He pushes himself too hard. He never stops." The doctor nodded grimly. He didn't seem surprised. He had seen it before in people who worked too hard and cared too much. He looked at the monitor tracking Keanu's heart rate. It was beating way too fast, struggling to pump blood through his body. "We need to run a full panel of tests," the doctor said to the nurses. "CT scan, chest x-ray, and I want blood work done right now. Check his electrolytes and his cardiac enzymes." The nurses scrambled to follow the orders. Someone stuck a needle in his other arm to draw blood. Another person placed electrodes on his chest to check his heart. The room was a blur of activity. The assistant stood in the corner, hugging herself, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. She wanted to go over there and hold his hand, but there was no space. She felt completely helpless. A younger nurse noticed her standing there and walked over. She put a gentle hand on the assistant's shoulder. "You need to wait in the lobby, honey," she said kindly. "The doctors need space to work. We will take good care of him." "I don't want to leave him alone," the assistant said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "He hates hospitals." "I know," the nurse said softly. "But the best thing you can do for him right now is let us do our jobs. We are going to figure out what's wrong. Go sit down. I will come find you the second we know anything." The assistant looked at Keanu one last time. His face was turned to the side, his eyes still closed. He looked so small surrounded by all that big equipment. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, please take care of him." "We will," the nurse promised. The assistant turned and walked out of the room. The journey back down the hallway felt much longer than the way in. The sounds of the emergency room faded behind her as she pushed through the doors into the waiting area. It was a large room filled with rows of plastic chairs bolted to the floor. A television was mounted on the wall, playing the news with the sound turned down. There were a few other people there, a mother holding a crying child, an old man with a bandage on his head. They all looked tired and worried. She found an empty chair in the corner and sat down. For the first time since he collapsed, she was alone with her thoughts. The adrenaline that had been keeping her going started to fade, replaced by a heavy, sinking feeling in her stomach. She pulled out her phone to call the studio, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely type the number. She thought about the set. She imagined everyone standing around, wondering what was happening. The news would spread soon. It always did. But right now, she didn't care about the movie or the press. She just wanted her friend to be okay. She remembered how he had looked when he collapsed, the way he tried to apologize even as he was falling down. That was just who he was. He was always thinking about everyone else. Minutes ticked by, turning into an hour. The waiting room was cold. She watched people come and go, some left crying, others left with relief. It was a strange, painful cycle of life and death that happened in this building every single day. She wondered what the doctors were finding. Was it his heart? Was it something worse? She tried to push the scary thoughts away, but they kept creeping back in. She knew he carried a lot of sadness in his life. She knew about the losses he had suffered over the years. He never talked about it much, but she saw it in his eyes sometimes when he thought no one was looking. He carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, and today it finally became too heavy. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the sliding glass doors to the main hall opened. The nurse who had escorted her out walked into the waiting area. She looked around and spotted the assistant in the corner. The nurse's expression was hard to read. She didn't look panicked, but she looked very serious. The assistant stood up immediately, her heart pounding in her chest. "Is he awake?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The nurse walked over and stopped in front of her. "He is stable," she said slowly. "But the doctors have found some things. They are reviewing the results now. The doctor wants to speak with you." The assistant felt her legs go weak. She grabbed the back of the chair for support. Is it bad?" The nurse hesitated for a second. "The doctor will explain everything. He is in room 304. You can go up and see him." The nurse turned and walked away, leaving the assistant standing there alone. The silence in the waiting room felt louder than before. Room 304. He was alive. He was stable, but the nurse's tone worried her. There was something in her voice that suggested this wasn't just a simple case of exhaustion. Something else was going on. Something that had shocked the medical team. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and headed for the elevator. She wasn't sure what she was about to walk into, but she knew she had to be strong for him, just like he had always been strong for everyone else. The elevator ride felt like it took an eternity. The numbers above the metal doors slowly counted up, lighting up one by one with a soft ding at each floor. The assistant stood alone in the small box, staring at her reflection in the shiny steel doors. She tried to fix her hair and straighten her shirt, wanting to look presentable, but her hands were still shaking a little. The fear was a heavy knot in her stomach. When the doors finally slid open on the third floor, the air smelled different here. It wasn't the sharp, chemical smell of the emergency room downstairs. It was quieter, calmer, but still filled with that distinctive antiseptic scent that reminded her she was in a place of sickness. She walked down the hallway, looking at the room numbers on the wall. 301302303. Finally, she stopped in front of room 304. The door to the room was slightly open, but she paused for a moment before going in. She could hear the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. It was a steady sound, which was good, but it also made the reality of the situation hit her all over again. She took a deep breath, pushed the door open gently, and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit. The blinds on the window were drawn, cutting off the bright afternoon sun and casting long shadows across the floor. In the center of the room, Keanu was lying in the hospital bed. He looked smaller than usual, swallowed up by the white sheets and the heavy machinery surrounding him. There were tubes running from his arm to a bag of clear fluid hanging on a metal pole. Another clip was attached to his finger, glowing a soft red. His eyes were closed and his chest rose and fell slowly. He looked peaceful, but in a way that scared her. He looked too still. She walked over to the side of the bed and pulled a plastic chair closer. She sat down and gently placed her hand on top of his. His skin felt a little warmer now, which was a relief compared to how cold he was in the ambulance. She just watched him breathe for a few minutes, listening to the beep of the monitor. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on the open door frame. She turned her head to see an older man standing there. He was wearing a white coat over blue scrubs, and he had a thick gray beard and kind eyes that looked tired behind wire-rimmed glasses. He held a clipboard in one hand and a tablet in the other. This was the lead doctor. "Hi," the doctor said, stepping into the room and keeping his voice low. "I'm Dr. Hansen. I've been reviewing Keanu's test results." The assistant stood up, smoothing her clothes nervously. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked immediately. "Doctor." Hansen walked over to the other side of the bed and looked down at his patient. He reached out and gently checked the pulse point on Keanu's wrist, glancing at the clock on the wall. "He is stable right now, which is the most important thing. The fluids are helping and his heart rate is coming down." But the doctor paused, looking up at the assistant with a very serious expression. "What we found inside him is quite surprising. It's actually shocking, to be honest." The assistant felt her breath catch in her throat. "What do you mean? What did you find, doctor?" Hansen pulled up a chair on the opposite side of the bed and sat down. He tapped the screen of his tablet, bringing up an image. It looked like a black and white X-ray. "We did a full body scan because we wanted to make sure there was no internal bleeding. When I looked at the images, I couldn't believe what I was seeing." He turned the tablet around so she could see the screen, though she didn't really know how to read it. He pointed to a series of white spots and jagged lines on the image. "Do you see this here?" the doctor asked, pointing to the spine area. "This is old scar tissue, a lot of it. And here on the ribs, these are fractures that healed a long time ago, but they healed. Wrong, they twisted back together." The assistant looked at the image, then at Keanu's sleeping face. "He does his own stunts," she said softly. "He's always getting banged up." The doctor nodded slowly. "I know who he is, I know what he does for a living. But this isn't just wear and tear from a recent movie. This is years, maybe decades, of accumulated trauma. His body is a map of injuries that were never treated properly. He has compressed discs in his back that must cause him constant pain. His joints are inflamed. It looks like he has been walking around on broken glass for years, yet he never stopped moving." He swiped the screen to show a chart with red and blue lines. "Then there is the blood work. This is the part that really worried us. His chemical balance is completely off. His body is severely deprived of essential nutrients. He is dehydrated on a cellular level. But the most shocking thing is the stress hormones in his blood. They are so high that, frankly, it is medically baffling that he didn't collapse months ago." The assistant stared at the doctor, trying to process it all. "He works so hard," she whispered. "He never complains. If you ask him how he is, he always says he's fine." "That's the problem," Dr. Hansen said, his voice full of concern. "He has been pushing his body past the limit of human endurance. Most people would have been in bed screaming in pain with the amount of damage I see on the scan. His body has been running on pure willpower, but you can't run a car engine without oil forever. Eventually, it just overheats and shuts down. That is what happened today. His engine finally gave out." The doctor put the tablet down on the bedside table and looked at Keanu with a look of genuine respect mixed with worry. "I have treated soldiers, athletes, and workers who have pushed themselves too far, but I have rarely seen someone who has masked so much pain so effectively. The human body isn't designed to take this kind of punishment without breaking. The fact that he was standing up and talking to you this morning is a miracle." The assistant felt tears pricking her eyes again. She thought about all the times she saw him wince or rub his back, and how he would just wave it off with a smile. She thought about how he would stay late to help the crew lift heavy things, even when his own body was screaming in pain. "He just wants to make a good movie," she said. "He wants to make everyone happy," Dr. Hansen sighed. "Well, he can't do that if he destroys himself in the process. He is going to need significant time to recover. We are going to have to address these old injuries. He needs rest, real rest, not just a few hours of sleep here and there. He needs to let his body repair itself." Suddenly, a soft moan came from the bed. Both the assistant and the doctor looked at Keanu. His eyelids fluttered and then slowly opened. They looked glassy and unfocused at first, but after a few blinks, they cleared up. He turned his head slightly and saw the assistant. "Hey," he croaked. His voice was raspy and weak. "Hey," she said, stepping closer and taking his hand again. "You gave us quite a scare." Keanu looked confused for a moment. He tried to shift his position in the bed, but a sharp pain made him gasp. His face twisted in discomfort. "Easy," Dr. Hansen said, standing up and adjusting the bed railing. "You're in the hospital. You collapsed on the set. You need to lie still." Keanu looked at the doctor, then back at the assistant. The confusion started to fade, replaced by a look of guilt. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Did I mess up the shot?" The assistant couldn't help it. A small laugh escaped through her tears. "Nobody cares about the shot, Keanu. We care about you, doctor." Hansen shook his head slightly, amazed by the actor's reaction. Even lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, his first thought was about the work. It confirmed everything the doctor had just said about the man's incredible, yet dangerous, dedication. "We are going to take good care of you," the doctor said in a firm but gentle voice. "But you have to promise me something. You have to stop hiding the pain. Your body is telling us a story that you haven't been telling anyone else. And it's time we listened to it." Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, looking exhausted. He gave a tiny nod. "Okay," he breathed out. The assistant squeezed his hand, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. He was awake. He was talking. And now, thanks to the doctor, they finally knew the truth about what he had been carrying inside him all this time. It was going to be a long road to get him better, but at least they knew where to start. The silence in the room wasn't scary anymore. It was the silence of a secret finally being told, and the beginning of a time for healing. The room was quiet again, save for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. It was a steady, comforting sound, a reminder that the worst had passed for now. Dr. Hansen stood by the bedside, looking down at Keanu with a mixture of medical curiosity and genuine human concern. The doctor had seen thousands of patients in his career. He had seen tough guys break down crying when they heard a bad diagnosis, and he had seen strong people deny they were in pain until the very end. But looking at Keanu, he felt he was in the presence of someone entirely different. The medication they had given him was starting to take the edge off the pain. The tense lines around Keanu's eyes were beginning to soften. He looked at the doctor, his eyes focusing a bit more clearly now. He still looked incredibly weak, his skin pale against the white hospital pillow, but his mind was clearing up. "Can you tell me exactly what's wrong with me?" Keanu asked softly. His voice was raspy, like sandpaper rubbing together. "Be honest, I can take it." Dr. Hansen pulled the chair closer and sat down, resting his elbows on his knees. He wanted to make sure Keanu understood the seriousness of it without causing him more stress. "It's not just one thing," Dr. Hansen began, choosing his words carefully. "It's like a dam breaking. You have spent decades carrying physical injuries that never healed right because you didn't give them time to. Your spine, your joints, your muscles, they are all screaming for help. But the real danger right now is the exhaustion. It's not just being tired. It's a total system failure because you haven't stopped." Keanu listened intently, his eyes never leaving the doctor's face. He didn't look away, he didn't try to argue, he just took it in. "The chemical levels in your blood were shocking when you came in," the doctor continued. "Your body has been running on pure adrenaline and willpower for so long that it forgot how to rest normally. You're severely dehydrated, and your nutrition levels are dangerous. You have been treating your body like a machine that doesn't need fuel or maintenance. But even the strongest machines break down eventually." Keanu let out a long, slow breath. He shifted his weight slightly in the bed and winced. "I just wanted to get the work done," he said quietly. "I didn't want to let anyone down. There are so many people relying on me. The crew, the cast, the fans. If I stop, everything stops." The assistant, who was standing near the window with her arms crossed, shook her head sadly. She had heard this reasoning from him before. It was his greatest strength, but it was also his biggest weakness. Dr. Hansen reached out and gently touched Keanu's arm. "I understand that you feel a responsibility. But here is the hard truth. If you don't stop now, voluntarily, your body is going to stop for you permanently. We can fix the injuries. We can fix the blood pressure with rest and fluids. But you have to change how you live. You can't keep carrying the world on your back. It's too heavy for one person." Keanu looked down at the blanket covering his legs. He seemed to be thinking, processing the doctor's words. The silence stretched out in the room. The assistant watched his face, wondering what was going on behind those sad eyes. Was he scared? Was he angry? She knew he hated being the center of attention, especially for something like this. He hated feeling like a burden. Suddenly, Keanu's head snapped up. His eyes widened with a look of panic that had nothing to do with his own health. He looked at the assistant, then back at the doctor. The guy, Keanu said, his voice becoming a bit louder and more urgent. The technician, the one I was talking to when I fell, is he okay? The assistant blinked in surprise. What? Keanu struggled to push himself up on the pillows, grimacing as his muscles protested. I remember. I was holding the light, we were talking, then everything went black. I fell right next to him. Did I hit him? Did I scare him? Dr. Hansen sat back, completely stunned. He had just told this man that his body was full of scars, and that his system was shutting down from years of abuse. Most people would be asking about their future, asking if they would walk again, or asking for more pain medication. But Keanu was worried about someone else. He was worried about a stranger he had met only 10 minutes before his heart nearly gave out. The assistant walked over to the bed and gently placed her hands on Keanu's shoulders, pushing him back down onto the pillow. Keanu, stop, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. He's fine. He wasn't hurt. He was the one who called for help. He was scared for you, asterisk. Keanu let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. His shoulders relaxed and the panic left his face. Good, he whispered. I'm glad. He's a nice kid. He was working so hard, I didn't want to ruin his day. Dr. Hansen looked at the assistant and then back at Keanu. He felt a lump form in his throat. In all his years of medicine, he had never seen anything like this. The human body was a biological wonder, but the human spirit was something else entirely. To see this level of empathy, this depth of kindness when he was lying in a hospital bed feeling terrible was shocking. It was a beautiful, humbling moment. You are a rare man, Keanu, Doctor Hansen said, his voice barely above a whisper. Most people in your position would be screaming at us. They would be angry at the world. You are lying here worrying about a lighting technician. Keanu managed a weak, lopsided smile. We're all in this together, right? If one of us falls, we all fall. The assistant wiped a tear from her cheek, not wanting him to see her cry. She had never loved him more than she did in that second. He was broken and hurting, but his heart was bigger than the hospital room they were sitting in. Well, Dr. Hansen said, standing up and smoothing his coat. Since you are worried about him, and since you are clearly more concerned about others than yourself, I am going to make a prescription for you. Keanu looked at him curiously. Is it a shot? No, the doctor said, smiling kindly. It's an order. You are not allowed to think about anyone else for at least a week. No worrying about the crew, no worrying about the movie. No worrying about the lighting guy. Your only job is to heal. That is the only way you will be able to help anyone else again. Keanu looked like he wanted to argue, but he was too tired. He nodded slowly. Okay, I'll try. It's not a try, it's a must, Dr. Hansen said firmly, but his eyes were warm. We are going to monitor you through the night. I suspect you will sleep for a long time. Your body needs to catch up on about 10 years of rest. The doctor checked the IV lines one last time and made a note on the clipboard at the foot of the bed. He gave the assistant a nod that said he's going to be okay, and then he quietly left the room. The room felt peaceful now. The tension had drained away. The assistant sat back down in the chair. She looked at Keanu, whose eyes were starting to droop again. The medication was pulling him back into a deep, healing sleep. Get some sleep, she said softly, brushing a stray hair away from his forehead. Thanks, Keanu mumbled, his eyes already closed. For staying. Always, she replied. She watched his chest rise and fall. It was a steady rhythm now. He looked younger when he slept, less burdened by the world. She thought about what the doctor said about the dam breaking. Maybe this was a blessing in disguise. Maybe the universe had decided that Keanu Reeves needed to stop because he was never going to stop himself. He was too busy taking care of everyone else. Now it was time for the world to take care of him. As the sun began to set outside the window, casting long orange shadows across the floor, the assistant finally let herself relax. The crisis was over. The healing had begun. 3 days had passed since the chaos of the ambulance ride and the scary silence of the trauma room. The mood in the hospital had shifted from frantic emergency to a quiet, steady rhythm of healing. The sun was shining brightly through the window of room 304, casting a warm, golden glow over the bed. The big, scary monitors that had been beeping constantly were gone now. All that was left was a small machine checking his vitals every few hours, making a soft click instead of a loud wail. Keanu was sitting up in a chair by the window, dressed in his own clothes, a simple t-shirt and sweatpants for the first time in days. He looked better. The gray color had left his face, replaced by a healthy, albeit tired pink, but he was moving slowly. Every motion was deliberate. He reached for a glass of water on the side table with both hands, as if the glass weighed as much as a dumbbell. Dr. Hansen came into the room, holding a clipboard. He smiled when he saw Keanu out of bed. "Good morning. You look like a human being again," the doctor said. Keanu managed a small smile. "I feel like I've been asleep for a year. But I feel less like a broken machine today." The doctor pulled up a chair and sat down. This was the final meeting before the discharge. "Your blood work is looking much better. The fluids and the rest have done wonders. Your heart rate is strong and steady. But Keanu, we need to talk about what happens when you walk out that automatic door today." Keanu nodded, his expression turning serious. He knew this lecture was coming. "I know. No more stunts for a while, no more skipping meals." "It's more than that," Dr. Hansen said, leaning forward. "You have to respect the pain now. When your back hurts, you have to stop. When you are tired, you have to sleep. The thing that shocked us the most, those hidden injuries, they are still there. We can manage them, but we can't erase them. You have to learn to live within your limits, not push past them every single time." "I understand," Keanu said softly. He looked out the window at the city skyline. "I think I was scared to stop. I felt like if I stopped moving, the sadness would catch up to me. But being here, lying in this bed, I realized that pushing myself until I collapse doesn't help anyone. It just turns me into a burden." "You were never a burden," the assistant said from the corner of the room. She was folding his clothes and packing his small bag. "You were just tired." There was a gentle knock on the door frame. It was the young lighting technician from the set. He looked a little nervous, holding a bouquet of bright yellow flowers. He peered into the room, unsure if he was allowed to be there. Keanu's face lit up. He waved the young man in. "Hey, come on in." The technician walked in, looking at Keanu with wide eyes. "I heard you were leaving today. I just wanted to come see you before you went. I brought these." He held out the flowers awkwardly. Keanu took them, genuinely touched. "These are beautiful." "Thank you, that's really kind of you." "I'm so sorry about what happened," the technician blurted out. "I feel terrible. We were talking and then you just—" "I should have made you sit down sooner." Keanu shook his head firmly. "No, don't do that. You didn't do anything wrong. My body decided it had enough, that's all. You were actually the last person I talked to, so I'm glad it was a friendly face." The young man seemed to relax a little. He rubbed the back of his neck. "We're all waiting for you to come back. The set feels different without you. It's quieter." Keanu laughed softly. "I'll be back. But maybe I'll let you lift the heavy lights this time." The technician smiled, and after a few minutes of chatting about nothing important, he said goodbye and left the room. Watching him go, Keanu seemed to realize something important. He saw the worry in the young man's eyes, the genuine care. It reminded him that his connection to people wasn't about how hard he worked or how much pain he could endure. It was just about being present. An hour later, it was time to go. The assistant zipped up the bag and slung it over her shoulder. Dr. Hansen walked with them to the elevator. The ride down was quiet, but it wasn't a heavy silence anymore. It was a peaceful silence. Keanu leaned against the wall of the elevator, taking slow breaths. He was still sore, but he felt lighter, as if a weight he had been carrying for years had been lifted just a little bit. They reached the ground floor. The main lobby of the hospital was busy with people coming and going, but nobody paid much attention to the man in the sweatsuit. He had a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, and he moved with the slow, careful steps of someone recovering from a long illness. They walked toward the exit. The large glass doors slid open automatically as they approached the sensor. A rush of fresh air hit them, carrying the sounds of the city, car horns, distant traffic, the hum of life. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, filtered air of the hospital. Keanu stepped out onto the sidewalk. He paused for a moment, closing his eyes and lifting his face slightly toward the sun. The warmth felt good on his skin. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with air that didn't smell like disinfectant. "You okay?" the assistant asked softly, standing close by in case he needed support. Keanu opened his eyes and looked at the busy street. Cars were driving by, people were walking their dogs, the world was continuing exactly as it had before he got sick. That was the thing about the world, it kept turning. but he felt different. "Yeah," Keanu said, his voice a bit stronger than before. "I'm okay. It's just good to be outside." Dr. Hansen stood in the doorway, watching them. He saw a man who had been pushed to the absolute breaking point, a man whose body had revealed a shocking history of silent suffering. But he also saw a man who was learning to accept help. The doctor knew Keanu would probably still work hard, and he would probably still try to do his own stunts. But he hoped that now, when the pain came, Keanu would listen to it instead of fighting it. "Take care of yourself," Dr. Hansen called out. Keanu turned and gave him a thumbs up. "I will, thanks for everything." The assistant led him to the waiting car. It was a simple black sedan, nothing flashy. Keanu opened the passenger door himself, wincing slightly as he lowered himself into the seat. He didn't want to be treated like he was made of glass. He wanted to get back to living, just a new version of it. Before he closed the door, he looked back at the hospital building one last time. It was a place of pain, but it was also a place where he had been forced to stop and look at himself. The secret was out now. He wasn't invincible, he was human. He had scars that couldn't be seen, and a heart that needed protecting just like everyone else's. He settled into the seat and buckled the seatbelt. The assistant started the engine and pulled away from the curb, merging into the flow of traffic. Keanu watched the buildings pass by through the window. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. There were dozens of messages, but he didn't look at them yet. He just put the phone down and looked out at the sky. He realized then that the shocking discovery the doctors made wasn't just about the injuries or the exhaustion. It was about the realization that even the strongest people have their limits. And hitting that limit wasn't a failure. It was just a reminder to breathe. He closed his eyes, letting the hum of the car soothe him. He was going to rest, just for a little while. And then, when he was ready, he would get back up. But this time, he wouldn't carry the weight of the world alone. He would let others help him carry it.